Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to talk about the current state of the meta for tanking in Season 2 of Dragonflight. Now, this isn't a tier list exactly. I have 3 different websites that all provide a lot of statistically valuable information. These are Warcraft Logs, Raider.io, and then Subcreation. And Subcreation really is a website that just aggregates the data from Warcraft Logs and Raider.io and then puts it into a lot easier to digest form. It creates tier lists out of it. I don't really care as much about that so much as the statistical data that they've compiled. So just to kind of jump right into it, we're going to start with Bear Druid because they've been the de facto tank of this half of this season. You know, since patch 10.1.5 landed with the introduction of augmentation invokers and the massive buffs to Bear Druid has been the super tank. Now, prior to patch 10.1.5, you know, the first third or half or who knows how long of season 2, Bear Druid actually sucked. It was not great. I liked playing it. I thought it was fun, but it really just wasn't very good. It was very mediocre. That patch is really what changed everything. And it changed everything, one, by creating what is known as the God comp, and that would be a Holy Paladin, a Bear Druid, and then this 3-player tier list of range classes: Augmentation Evoker, Shadow Priest, and Fire Mage. It's the best comp in the game. It has been nerfed. Every single one of the specs has been nerfed, and it still seems to be the best comp in the game. I know Holy Paladin just got some changes today in the patch that I haven't looked at because I haven't thought about healing in like 15 years. Maybe that shifts which healer is used in the God comp, but either way. And I have here a page from the top timed runs in this season. As you can see, I've come all the way to page, whatever this is, like page 9 or something. We've got right here, run 189. The 189th ranked run in the world is the one run, the highest rated run that is not using a Bear Druid. They're using a Blood Decay. And then the rest of the page is also still Bear Druids. If we go to the next page, also still Bear Druids. So out of the top 220, 219 of them are Bear Druids. One is a Blood Decay. I didn't double check to make sure that the other 4 are always the same classes, but, you know, probably. This isn't indicative of anything other than really like this is the most optimal thing to run at the absolute highest levels. You know, Prot Warriors, even though they're not particularly well played, they're still completely fine up into the mid to high 20s. You know, all of the lower popularity specs are still completely fine, and that's kind of going to be the premise of this video. But Bear Druid is definitely sitting atop the throne. Now, Bear Druid has actually gotten several nerfs, along with some of the lower performing specs getting some buffs. For example, Bear Druid's Ursoc's Fury shield started out this patch at 60% of all damage dealt by Thrash and Maul. Shielding you, it has been nerfed twice now. It's down to 45% of all damage, and the 2 spells that feed into it, those would be Raise and Thrash, have also been nerfed by 8%. So I do think that Bear is starting to trend downward, and I would not be surprised because Blizzard has a tendency to do this. They did this with Prot Warrior in Season 1, where it was very much overperforming, and then they nerfed it like 6 times in a row, and now it's like at the bottom of the barrel. I wouldn't be surprised if they hit with Bear Druid with a couple of more nerfs. I'm surprised that they didn't do it in patch 10.1.7 today, but, you know, there's always the future, and I think 10.2 could spell some nerfs to Bear Druid, or, you know, more hopefully, more optimistically, just some buffs to some other classes, some other specs. With that being said, Bear Druid is at the top of the mountain right now. They're the best tank. This is a raid tier list, you know, raid damage breakdown, and we also have some Warcraft Logs tank statistics as well. If we show off, this is Mythic Dungeon. Here we go. 95th percentile in raid. This is after the first main augmentation evoker nerf in week 5 of patch 10.1.5. So all of the last month and a half or so of logs of tanks. We actually have a relatively tight spread between like the 3rd and 6th place options. It's not that bad. And then Bear Druid is just way out in front of everybody else. Brewmaster Monk, a decent bit ahead of Vengeance Demon Hunter. Now, this is just tank damage. This isn't the full spectrum, combination of tankiness and unique utility, things like spell warding and all. But obviously, if a tank is just massively outperforming the rest of the field like this, and it's also insanely tanky, like almost impossible to die on a Bear Druid, that'll affect tank balance. That'll affect what people want to play. And that is why, if we look here, and this is all affixes, this is not the current affix setup, but if we're just looking at the statistical breakdown, here's the number of logs for Bear Druids. It's close to 100,000 in Mythic Plus. The next closest in popularity would be like 30,000 for Vengeance Demon Hunter. It's the meta-defining tank. But Vengeance Demon Hunter, and now I'm transitioning to the second class here, Vengeance Demon Hunter is right on their heels. They are also in great shape. They're in great shape defensively, offensively, and the future looks bright for Demon Hunter in a way that it doesn't for Bear Druid, because Blizzard has Bear Druid in their sniper scope right now. They've hit him with 3 nerfs. They're probably going to hit him with more. Vengeance Demon Hunter hasn't gotten nerfed at all. It's looking great. It still feels great. It's incredibly smooth and easy to play in Mythic Plus, and despite the fact that Bear Druid completely dominates the meta at the 32 plus range, if you just look at 25 and up, or even let's just make it a little bit more friendly to the average man, the 20 and up range, they're one of the more popular tanks this season. Prop Pally's always going to be one of the most popular tanks in any sort of Mythic Plus pushing situation, because they have Avenger Shield. That alone can carry a group's ability to do interrupts. You can have people who have no idea what an interrupt even is. A bunch of Shadow Priests or whatever, doesn't matter. Protection Pally can just do 7 times the interrupts of another tank and completely carry the hell out of the group. Vengeance Demon Hunter is still in that top 3 in terms of popularity among more normal dungeon ranges, though, right there with Blood DK, who are also always super popular because they're very tanky. Now, one thing I didn't mention here in this little pointing out the nerf to Bear Druid is Blood DK also just got a random damage buff, which is pretty nice. And there I'm kind of transitioning into the next class. Bear Druid right now, top of the mountain. I think Vengeance Demon Hunter's right on their heels and maybe sliding under Blizzard's radar, but Blood DK is also in pretty great shape. They're a really, really great tank in Mythic Plus, and my biggest problem with them, the thing I talked about in my last guide, is that their damage sucks. That's really only true in Raid. In Mythic Plus, when you have your cooldowns going at the start of a pull, your damage is great. You're slamming, you're gripping everything together with A-Bomb Limb. You actually deal decent AoE damage on a Blood DK now. It's not like Brewmaster Monk damage where you're just annihilating everything that moves, everything that lives. But it's still quite good, and you have this incredible level of control over your defenses as a Blood DK. And I really do think that puts them as kind of a third place, very competitive tank in Mythic Plus. And then because they have so much control over their defenses in raids, they are always popular in raids. Even if everything about the class sucks and it's not well suited to a raid tier, there's not any fights to grip stuff around, there's not any mechanics to AMS and just completely cheese, it's still always a good tank in raid. It's almost impossible for them to nerf Blood DK to the point that it sucks in raid, and they definitely haven't been trying to do that. It's pretty well balanced. After that, we have Paladin, which I think is, it's also in a similar state. Right now, I think that any of the combination of Blood DK, Paladin, Monk, Bear Druid, and Demon Hunter could all be valued for the next Race to World first. There are so many factors that contribute to that. Are there mechanics in raid that you can spell ward to immune and just completely cheese a fight? If so, Pally's going to get used. Its damage did get a buff. Somewhere in these hotfix notes, it got a buff. I'm not going to go searching for them. Oh, no, here it is right here. That was a long search. 8% damage buff to Prop Pally, just randomly thrown out. Pretty good. It's still very tanky. It has amazing cooldown uptime. Still has maybe the best cooldown uptime of any tank in the game. Demon Hunter's the other competitor there, where you just have this insane uptime on Fiery Brand as a Demon Hunter. You have pretty great uptime on Sentinel and Ardent Defender and Guardian of Ancient Kings and, Divine Shield and Spell Warding as a Pally. It's just really, really good. And then in Mythic Plus, of course, it absolutely carries the hell out of interrupts. Just insane interrupt machine gun. Then we have Brewmaster Monk, and Brewmaster Monk I think gets a little overrated in Raid. I love it. It's my main. It's the thing I play the most, and it does great damage. It may wind up being the best damage dealing tank in the next Raid tier if Bear Druid gets any sort of nerfs. The only real problem with it is that in Mythic Plus, it gets absolutely blasted. It just takes so much damage because Stagger is just not tuned to compensate for the amount of auto attack damage that mobs deal in Mythic Plus. Now, Brewmaster Monk has seen a bit of a meta shift in its talent setup in Mythic Plus, and I did make like a series of videos about this, but we're just gonna show off Mythic Plus defensive. Nope, that's not it. All right, looks like I have some stuff I have to change for the Wowhead guide. That's fine. Basically, you run a talent setup that looks like this. It will come down. It will look like a normal talent setup. Except at the end of things here, what you're going to want to spec into is going to spec into Press the Advantage. This makes it so that you don't have to press Tiger Palm at all. There we go, fix that. You're not pressing Tiger Palm at all in Mythic Plus, but you're still getting cooldown reduction on your brews. You're still getting that added damage on your auto attacks. And then you're getting like double hits on occasional keg smashes. This winds up, you know, I've kind of caught some backlash from the Monk Discord community because it's not as good in Sims. It's certainly not as good in Raids. But this gets used by higher level monks. I think the argument has consistently been because it's simpler. You know, high level monks don't care about it being simple, right? Like if you're playing a class at the absolute peak of ability, then like cutting down complexity, it's not the concern for you. It really is more about the consistency that it provides. It provides more consistent damage and consistent damage reduction. And having played around with this setup quite a bit, I have definitely found it to be more consistently defensive and just stronger overall in Mythic Plus. Additionally, and maybe less controversially, you can take these talents over here in the left-hand tree. I'm definitely not going to take that. Here we go. All right. And there we go. Yulon's Grace and Dance of the Wind. These have both been really powerful in Mythic Plus. Yulon's Grace is maybe a little bit more controversial because, you know, sometimes there are spots where you really want to have diffuse magic to specifically mitigate some sort of tyrannical boss ability. But Yulon's Grace, if you're not specifically trying to mitigate something with diffuse magic, it's basically just a stacking magic damage shield. Really, really makes you a lot more tanky against magic damage over the course of a Mythic Plus dungeon, and does so passively, and that really fixes one of Monk's biggest problems. Additionally, Dance of the Wind, 10% more dodge chance all the time. It really adds up to a ton of damage reduction from auto attacks, and that is the thing that's always killed Monk in Mythic Plus. So this is really, really good. Now for Protection Warrior, it's kind of, I think it's definitely undervalued right now. It's gotten several different rounds of buffs, and I actually did like a little roundup to those in the Wowhead guide here. The first of which was just a damage buff. The second was a damage buff to just a couple of talents that weren't underperforming. This is just a nice little buff to talents that you're already using. And then the third and the most impactful was a flat stamina buff, just a static health increase, a damage increase to spell reflections damage reduction effect, which should help you a little bit. Both of these two really will help you a little bit with dealing with spell damage, which, I mean, those are the main things that kill Protection Warrior: spell damage and damage that you can't block. So, you know, bleeds, I don't know, unblockable attacks, that kind of thing. And both of these help with that a little bit. Additionally, Defensive Stance was made so that instead of reducing your damage output by 10%, it reduces your damage output by 5% while it's active. Now, I'm logged into my Protection Warrior because there was another change that happened I couldn't find documented anywhere. Previously, Defensive Stance gave you 15% damage reduction it still shows as that amount in like Wowhead data mine tooltips, but that's not correct. It actually gives you 20% damage reduction, as we can see from the tooltip here. Damage taken reduced by 20%, damage dealt reduced by 5. So, you know, that basically gives you a 3-second cooldown on like Demoralizing Shout or Bark Skin or Ardent Defender or any of those mid-level defensive cooldowns. That's really, really useful for mitigating like big predictable sources of damage. And I think that this ties into basically a way that they intend for Protection Warrior to be played, because up until this point, up until this change, the way that you would use defensive stance is big boss strike's about to come in, you hit defensive stance, and then you toggle back out as soon as that's happened. That is the way that I would play 90% of the time. I think now more what you want to do is any situation where you're not worried about your defenses, obviously you stay in battle stance, it's fine. Otherwise, if you have your offensive cooldowns up, you know, you pop all those, you use them all, Avatar, Demoralizing Shout, blah, 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 doing all my stuff, going nuts, in battle stance, maximizing damage. Then once all that's ended, play it safe, defensive stance. If it's hairy at all, scary at all, you're in defensive stance, you're safe. You got 20% damage reduction. It's really helping out. It's really fixing a lot of the problems that Prot Warrior has. All the damage that you can't block is actually pretty lethal on a Prot Warrior. And it's just not, you know, it's not really something that like a lot of other tanks have to deal with. Even Protection Paladin, they have the ability to block spells. They have a lot of self-shielding from Avenger Shield, and Prot Warriors really just limited to you press Ignore Pain, it mitigates as much damage as you can, and then you're kind of stuck. There is one other little trend I've started noticing with Prot Warrior lately, and that is to shift from using Show of Force, which is just a damage increase, into using Thunderlord in Mythic Plus so that you can have a lot more uptime on your Demoralizing Shout, and I think that's something we could see more of. Additionally, I've seen people drop Blood Surge and take Spell Block. You can drop Blood Surge, or you could drop Battering Ram. Battering Ram will lose you more damage, Blood Surge would lose you more rage generation, but basically having both Spell Block and Thunderlord, so you're having way higher uptime on your defensive cooldowns, and using that as a way to be able to survive in pushing up into higher level Mythic Plus. Now, I still think that the standard Prot Warrior talent setup is just what you're going to want to run most of the time, but you know, I think this is certainly like an interesting development that maybe could see a growth in popularity in the future. Maybe it gets iterated more upon and becomes like the de facto way to play in patch 10.2. At this point, I think that all of the tanks are pretty appealing. They all have a reason to play them. Even Prot Warrior, which is definitely the lowest on the totem pole, the least popular of the 6 tanks, I actually think it's a little underrated. I think that the round of buffs that they were given has mostly compensated for all of their shortcomings, and at this point it's just unpopular because it was unpopular before, and there hasn't been anything like big and sexy to really draw people back in. But I think they're in pretty great shape. I could definitely see another round of buffs happening in 10.2 that actually causes them to, be propelled back up into a higher position of prominence. This could also change with tier set bonuses as well. Again, there's so many different things to consider, but ultimately, I think all of the tanks are in a pretty good state moving forward, and I'm just really excited for what patch 10.2 has to offer for all the tanks. They've all been really fun to play this season, and I'm just looking forward to the future. All right, I think that's about it. Thanks for watching, and bye.